was the co-chair, I have to say, with Nemtsov, with Boris. Boris Nemtsov and Kasyanov were together the co-chairs of PARNAS, RPR-PARNAS, who is, let me say that, maybe the only credible, liberal-oriented democratic opposition force in Russia. And as you know, we work together with PARNAS. PARNAS makes part of the Alliance for Liberal and Democrats for Europe as party. So Mr. Kasyanov is every time there where there is a congress and a conference of the ALDE. I was also every time invited by Boris Nemtsov and by Mikhail when there were conferences of PARNAS in Moscow. And when we have heard the murder on Boris Nemtsov, I got the possibility immediately to phone to Mikhail from Prague on, because it was just after the ANO Congress, or just before the ANO Congress started. And we agreed that it should be a good thing that he is coming to the European Parliament. And today already, I think, Mikhail, you got a very busy program, seeing Mogherini, Juncker, Schulz. Tomorrow morning, there is a meeting of AFET, a special meeting of AFET, where Mikhail is going to testify before the AFET meeting. And I have also to apologize a few of our members of AFET, because they are at this moment negotiating with the other groups the resolution on Russia, Mikhail. So Hans, for example, Hans van Baal, our coordinator for AFET, is not here. He is negotiating the Russia resolution with the other groups. So my proposal is that I give you immediately the floor, so that you can give for our members an overview of what you see, what is the situation for the moment in Russia, what is happening, what are the prospects also for the democratic opposition in Russia. Also, maybe to explain how many demonstrations have already been held that are not even known in Europe. Last year, for example, a few big rallies of more than 50,000 people that were not even noticed by the public opinion and by the press outside Russia, and also how, with positive measures, also what we can show to the Russian people, that our attitude is not against Russia, not against the Russian citizens and population. On the contrary, but it's against a regime and against Putin. That is our action, and how we can help in giving confidence to ordinary Russians in the attitude of the European Union. But I give you immediately the floor, Mikhail.
Thank you, Guy. Dear colleagues, friends, it's a great honor for me to be with you in these days. Thank you for the invitation to join you and just to exchange of our views, what we have in Russia, and what we shall do, and how we should interact with my country. We, I mean just Russian liberals, Democrats, and you, our friends here in Europe. Liberals, Democrats from different political groups, and our family group, European liberals. As you well know, my personal friend and my collaborator, political collaborator for many years, Boris Nemtsov, was murdered in the center of Moscow. And that assassination it happened almost in the midnight, just on Friday, on the walls of Kremlin, near the Red Square, and the most controlled area in the city. We view it as a demonstrative murder, of course with political motivation. It was absolutely awful and sad that President Putin, within a short period of time, made a statement when I was standing on a bridge near the body of killed Boris Nemtsov, and where the statement from President Putin was just, that was a provocation. That immediately different forces in Russia started to speculate who provoked, who made that provocation, starting with the CIA, United States, and different secret services here in Europe, and Ukrainian secret services, and ending with the opposition, that it was our internal settlement, something like that. Then they understood that cannot be sold to public in any case, and later we heard another statement which is more closer to reality when Mr. Putin condemned this criminal murder and just, as I guess, gave an order to have a thorough investigation. Today, unfortunately, we have another version, as a main version, as we see, of investigation, that it was not a political but Muslim religious motivation, with some kind of explanation that Boris Nemtsov made some kind of anti-Muslim statements, which is absolutely doesn't fit with any reality. Boris Nemtsov never made any statements of such nature. Moreover, we are liberals, and that is foundation of our party. And Mr. Nemtsov and mine, that is, we were always tolerant for all nations and religions, etc. That's why it couldn't be taken by normal people as a reality. Maybe these 4 persons arrested, maybe they're really involved in the execution of this assassination, but not, of course, they are not organizers. What the general situation we have in Russia, why this murder potentially could happen? As you well know, that since 2012, when in this House, an initiative of Liberal Group, you adopted a resolution not accepting the results of parliamentary and presidential elections and claiming them not free and fair, not in accordance with international standards. And that time, Mr. Putin decided, already understood, that he cannot gain any support from educated part of society, from those people whom we call it middle class, independent people living in big cities. And since that time, the propaganda and the consolidation efforts started to appear, so that to consolidate other part of society, living in remote areas and smaller cities. But what happened during last year, since the conflict with Ukraine, since the invasion of Putin's secret services and other support of conflict in Ukraine, which was created by Putin's regime, as I like to emphasize, there was no and there is no civil war at all. Everything on eastern Ukraine was created by Putin. And since that time, the propaganda exposed a mobilization spirit in the society, and it's finished with the official statement of President Putin last autumn, a few months ago, that when he said in an official speech that Russia is surrounded by enemies, and we inside country have a 5th column, and we inside country have national betrayers, enemies, naming us liberals as main enemies of the regime. And since that time, all demonstrations in support of Putin, it was 2 of them, of course, was devoted to that, with the direct calling for people just to eliminate those columns and those betrayers. That how just the whole environment created. Hostile environment, intolerance, and anger to each other. Today, of course, a difficult period for us, for democratic Russia, for those people who voted for adoption of constitution or Russian constitution as a democratic state, with the priority of human rights and democratic pillars like free media, independent judiciary, separation of power, and, what is the most important, free and fair elections. We don't have any of these features today. Russia is not a democracy anymore. We have no single feature of democratic state implemented in practice. Today, we have a completely different environment after the murder of Boris Nemtsov. This environment, of course, doesn't allow us to perform in a normal political competition because we have no access to media, we have pressure on us. Human rights people warned us even a year ago that you should be prepared for some kind of repression. Boris didn't pay attention to that, and what we know what happened with him. What we shall do, we should protect our values, values here existing in the European Union countries, existing in our Russian constitution. We should describe to people here in Europe and in Russia what the regime is about, that Russian people and Russian Federation is completely different from Putin's team, Putin's regime. It's two different things. And we should describe to people all the lie the regime uses to support and to give arguments for their outrageous behavior, reckless policy, irresponsible policy. We should not forget that Russian Federation, together with other countries like United States of America and the Great Britain, are the guarantors of territorial integrity of Ukraine and sovereignty of Ukraine. Russia is a permanent member of Security Council, responsible in the world for the security in the world. And when my country, I would say not my country, the government of my country, authorities of my country, destroys all these principles, all architecture of European security, that is not acceptable in the 21st century. Why Putin and his team had the permission to do this? We all, not us because we criticize heavily, but you made a mistake in the year 2008 when, during invasion to Georgia and after having a special peace plan, so-called by the name of French President Sarkozy at that time, having not implemented no single point by Russian government, came back to the relations of Mr. Putin to business as usual. That was taken by Mr. Putin and his team as a normality in the behavior. That's why it happened, invasion against Ukraine. Of course, Mr. Putin miscalculated this time, because you here in the European Union taken a principled, consolidated position, which was absolutely a shock for him. He couldn't imagine that some countries could go this way, that businesses of those countries would allow their governments to behave this principled way. And moreover, the transatlantic consolidation took place. And Mr. Putin couldn't play the way that the main enemy, the United States and European Union, divided, splitted by different regional interests, couldn't perform as a real considerable player. But he miscalculated. You made and keep the strong position, which is absolutely crucial for this. I think you should understand that now fighting Ukraine, on the territory of Ukraine, that's not a fight of Russia with Ukraine, of Putin's regime with Ukraine. That's a fight of Putin's regime with civilized world. It happened so that territory of Ukraine chosen for this fight. That is fight against values we all devoted to and we protect. If we don't stop the aggressor here, there, in Ukraine, he would start testing other opportunities. For instance, why not to test the Article 5 of NATO Charter and to try to protect Russian-speaking population in other countries They maybe not necessarily ask Mr. Putin to protect them, but he knows better whom to protect. That's why I think that's very important to have a principled, consistent position in this period of time. That is a reality. Any compromise on Ukrainian integrity and sovereignty right now, I and all of us should view as a punishment of Ukrainian people. Why we should punish Ukrainian people for what? For their desire to live independently, to determine their future by themselves? Absolutely unacceptable. That's why I think we're living in a different period of time. We in Russia now just live in a more difficult situation. For us liberals and all Democrats, it is much more difficult. Our activists in the regions scared because they're under big pressure of local authorities. In Moscow, a little bit better, but as you can imagine, dangerous too. But we continue our fight, and we dream for peaceful resolution of this. There is the only way, the only scenario of peaceful changing of the regime is free and fair elections. It doesn't seem from today's perspective that it's realistic at all, but other way is revolution. My party and I, we don't want just to move Russia to this direction. Russia already fed up our revolutions. That's why we'll try to undertake our efforts to press the regime to implement Russian constitution and to arrange free and fair elections under control of civil society, which will have elections we're scheduled to have next year. It seems to be a little bit naive, but we have no other way. If we stay strongly on our principles, you are here in the European Union and we're there in Russia, and continue to demand from the regime, we can achieve a positive solution. Thank you.
Okay, I open the floor for the members, Sophie, and then afterwards Hans. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Guy, and thank you for being here and sharing your views with us. And although what you describe is extremely difficult, you also give us a message of hope. I just have a few short questions. You're talking about a peaceful resolution and the way forward. We need to create a new prospect for Russian people, and I think the ALDE group wants to set a positive agenda for our relations with Russia, but for that we would also need counterparts. Who are the people in civil society that we can reach out to and talk to? The second question, more detailed, about the whole issue of the murder and everything. So now there's this new theory that it's Muslim or Islamic fundamentalists who killed him because he spoke out after Charlie Hebdo. But how do people actually believe that terrorists would kill somebody in secret and not claim the murder? Because that's what terrorists do. They want publicity, they want visibility. So do people actually think this is credible? And then my final question is, you said it was good when the European Union stuck together and we had a single coherent message to Mr. Putin. But what kind of message would you expect from the European Union right now? What is the language that he would understand? Thank you.
Hans, our coordinator for AFET.
Thank you, Guy. Michael, it's good that we have you here, and we support you. We had just a meeting on a resolution on Nemtsov, which is broader than that. It's also about internal democracy, it's about the rule of law internationally. And you see that a lot of people think the following. They say, well, if we would not have been on Maidan Square, if we would not have enlarged NATO, well, if we not have done this or that, Putin would be a Democrat. I recently even saw a leader of my party of 20 years ago who said Van Balen and Verhofstadt should not have been on Maidan helping those people who were oppressed. I don't believe this. I think that Putin's policies were predetermined, that is to restore at least an influence, the former Soviet Union, is at least an influence. So if you look at this, do you think that those who say that we are to blame by supporting democracy in Kiev, by supporting the defense of independent nations, or do you think that is nonsense? Please, I am interested in your comments.
Thank you, Hans. Pavel Telichka.
Thank you. Once again, welcome, and I can only echo what colleagues have said. Full support, but also admiration. I mean, we all know that that takes some courage. In fact, I was to have a very similar question to Sophie. I think you were absolutely clear on describing the situation in Russia. I think that is our description. I think the words are loud and clear, and definitely would be echoed by us. We are at the moment, I think, of course, facing a situation where we do not have a complete unity in the European Union. We've seen Putin in Budapest, we've seen today the Spanish foreign minister in Moscow, and I do apologize for lukewarm attitude of the Czech President Miloš Zeman on those issues. I feel like Czech the need to apologize here in this respect. So we lack that, and therefore we lack a really strong, coherent strategy on Russia. And I think that while I understood what your message is, if you would later on, once answering our questions, give us the 3-4 main points which no strategy on Russia should neglect. Thank you.
Thank you, Pavel. Gesine Meissner.
Thank you very much. Yes, welcome as well from my side. I just had been in Barcelona on the weekend, and there I met Professor Galina Jawlinski, and I talked with her about the situation in Russia as well. Well, of course, now you are here and can tell us several things, and I asked her as well what we discussed here in the group. What can we actually do to in favor of Russian people? How can we really approach Russian people and show them we are against Putin, but we are not against Russia in general? And she said it might be very difficult because the propaganda is so strong against everything that comes from the West. And she told me that all those who are in opposition are called foreign agents right now and are in danger to be imprisoned. And then she named, for example, Yevgeny Vitichko and Maxim Petlin, who are in prison right now. And she just said, because I asked her what can we do, that, for example, we should really try to figure out who is imprisoned without any really reason, and whom can we support by naming those people, by supporting all those who are still in opposition. That's some proposal what she made. And another thing I asked her for political foundation. For example, we have from Germany the Friedrich Naumann Foundation, and she said, well, that's a problem because the foundations, especially from Germany, the big ones, they cooperate with Putin. And that's what was her side, her point of view. And she said the other foundation, like Friedrich Naumann Foundation, the liberal one, doesn't dare to do anything anymore because they don't want to be thrown out of the country. Do you share her views, or have you any other proposal what we really can do in order to support you in opposition and support the people in Russia?
Thank you. Petras, who was representing the group on the funeral of Boris Nemtsov.
Thank you, Guy. Mikhail, indeed, thank you for coming to Strasbourg and talking to us. And colleagues, we should really understand what does it mean to be here and to speak. Day after tomorrow, we will go, to our capitals, to cities. And Mikhail, he will have to bound on the plane and come back to Moscow. I do appreciate efforts of Mikhail Kasyanov and people like him continue their fight. I would call it fight and course for more democratic and different Russia with really perspective of respecting human rights and the rest. Mikhail, I would appreciate your comments on possibility to have more united opposition, since Putin assembled a huge power in his hands, with oligarchs and power structures. Do you see any possibility really to see a more united and more effective political power raising issues are so important? And finally, would you comment something on the situation, political and social economic situation in province? Because many Western people see shiny Moscow St. Petersburg and some bigger cities, and they believe that the life in Russia is as in those cities. Could you disclose some reality over there?
Jana Tum.
Thank you. Quite recently, the Levada Center, a respectful independent Russian sociological service, estimated the support for liberal political forces in Russia as equal to 15–18%. In other words, under certain circumstances, every seventh Russian may support liberal politicians and liberalism as a political ideology. I understand that for you and for other Russian liberals, it is a big challenge. So my question is how you and other Russian liberals are going to develop their relations with the rest of the population of Russia, or those 6/7 of all population which is not unfortunately ready to vote for you. Thank you.
Marietje Schaake.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome, Mr. Kasyanov. Our condolences to the loss in such a terrible way of your companion and colleague Boris Nemtsov, who was, I think, appreciated and loved far beyond Russia's borders, but particularly within. You highlighted the transatlantic relation and its importance, the role that the United States still plays in guarding security, but you also cited the mistakes of 2008. And when I was at the Munich Security Conference a few weeks ago and Chancellor Merkel returned from talks in Moscow, the air was really electric because it seemed like there would be kind of a verdict on whether there would be war again in Europe or whether a political solution could still be found. And it was quite clear how divided Europe is, but not only that, on the other end of Merkel's choice for diplomacy were increasingly loud calls, for example, by the Republicans in the United States, to arm the Ukraine, to allow it to defend itself. Now, can you sketch what options you think are the most viable, given the fact that the Minsk agreement has been violated, given the fact that it's difficult to get consensus on sanctions in the EU, and given the fact that there are some that call for arming the Ukraine? It would be very helpful if you can cite the way forward that you think works. And we're also interested to learn whether the alleged information that Boris Nemtsov had about Russia's role in Ukraine is something that's being worked on after he's no longer here.
Okay, thank you, Ivo Weigel.
Thank you. Mikhail, I would like to greet you, and I remember when you were last time here, we were smiling and we were hoping. So it is difficult to make the cool questions about future European-Russian relations, but I think in difficult time we have to ask cool questions and hard questions. I am kind of afraid of the reaction on everything what is happening in Ukraine and Russia, and now this horrible attack in Moscow. I am afraid that this emotional reaction is already raising rather negative feelings for Russia at all, Russia. So, and that we have some troubles to differentiate between the Putin's regime and Russia as our neighbor, which will always be our neighbor and has always been our neighbor. And I think sometimes we express this our problem to make the difference also by statements like Russia is not anymore our strategic partners. Of course it is, but not Putin regime, but Russia is our strategic partner. It is our neighbor of enormous strategic value for us and for the world. So I would like to ask you, I think also we, others than some other people who think always have right, I have my doubts about how we were handling the Ukrainian crisis. We here in European Union and particularly in European Parliament. I would like to know more from the people like you are about did we misjudge the nature of Ukraine when we were saying the Ukrainians are the pro-West Ukrainians and the Russian-speaking Ukrainians are pro-Russian, which means pro-Russian state, not only pro-Russian cultural adherence and tradition. And now I will finish by asking you, I remember the times, I am a little bit older politician, I remember in the early 90s, we had quite developed contacts to the Russian politicians, those who were promising a different Russia, democratic development. It was the time when you were in the leading position in the government. But then the fascination of authoritarian leader, as Putin was, made us neglect the others. Now we have to reestablish it. The fascination is over. I remember it was Bush who said that he was just looking at the eyes of Putin and saw that it is an honest man, you know. So obviously he was wrong. And I would like to hear from you, but maybe not today, maybe in the future, how can we find our partners? How can we develop? With whom should we communicate? How should we communicate on a more productive, on more creative way? And I wish, of course, you a safe life and safe return and at most courage. But it looks you have it enough of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ivo. Rika?
Thank you. Many of us we know very well what means Russian protection, you know, but I'm deeply convinced that Putin is prepared to protect, I put brackets, other Russian population. Do you believe that Transnistria, Gagauzia, and the area in the south Ukraine, it's in danger? Do you consider the current level of sanctions introduced by the European Union enough for determining Putin to be more afraid of the situation? Do you consider that the sending troops in Ukraine by European Union can be a solution in the same way? And last, certainly on me, in this House, you, opposition and fighter for democracy, you receive a lot of support. But I'm afraid, looking to the European economic interest in Russia, I saw many important companies, huge European companies, that are not really, I'm not convinced that are many countries deeply convinced to support the democratic approach.
Thank you. Jean-Marie Cavada. Monsieur le Président Kasyanov.
Chairman, Mr.
Gospodine Kasyanov,
you said when you arrived that you felt honoured to be among us, and I'd like to say that it's quite the opposite. We are the ones who feel honoured that you were able to come and bring the people's voice from Russia to our meeting. We are the ones who are honoured. What we see in Russia at present, from a Western point of view, is like 1948 in Czechoslovakia, when a minister was assassinated for a takeover of power, and this is like the persecutions of Sakharov and Nabonair and all those deported to Gorky or elsewhere. And it is like the adventures of the Sudeten people at the end of the 1930s, where they tried out their power. And since the West was disordered in its reaction, this was a second place, and everyone who has taken the floor here is afraid of there being a third testing place, and I think you will understand this, that it could be in the Baltic countries. So I'd like to put two questions. What is the real impact of economic sanctions which the Europeans have applied within Mr. Putin's regime? Because tyranny can only collapse from inside. I do not believe at all that it can be brought to an end by external force. So what is the impact of these sanctions? And secondly, is it dangerous to consider, and I'm thinking of NATO, I'm very reluctant about this, but it's not my opinion which counts, it's your judgment. What about a military option to demonstrate our power, to bring some balance back into the power relationship to the benefit of the West? Thank you.
Angelika Milner.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kasyanov. Thank you very much for being with us, and thank you very much for showing us this kind of courage. I'm speechless and very impressed. I would support what Ivo Weigl just stated, and I said this also during our European election campaign, that I'm convinced that there is no peaceful continent without a cooperation and a good partnership with Russia. I'm not talking about Putin, but I'm talking about Russia. And at the moment, it doesn't look good, and it will be difficult with Putin. What Marietje Schaake said about transatlantic cooperation, I would stress this, and I think we have a real sense of wish to be secure. And here I would kindly ask you to give us your estimate about what you think, what the reactions of Putin could be regarding the NATO exercises in Latvia. Thank you.
Thank you. Nils Torvald.
Добро пожаловать в парламент, и большое спасибо за то, что вы с нами сегодня. During the Christmas recess, I actually read Diego Gaidar's book, Gibel Imperi, which actually gives a very sad picture of the structural problems Russia is facing. Even if the book is written 10 years ago, I think it's a very accurate picture. Peter has already asked what's the difference if you go from Moscow slightly outside the town. During my years in Moscow, I usually went to Konakovo, which is roughly 50 kilometers from the center of Moscow. And in Konakovo, nothing had happened during after the reforms, after the imperium went down. But the real question is actually what's going to happen in Russia if you aren't able to make the structural reforms you're going to need to be a fairly modern country in the future, because for the moment being in the international value chain, you are falling down and down and down and down, and that's, to be very frank, that's a recipe for hell, not just for you, it's a recipe for hell also for Europe. Thank you.
Thank you, Nils. Umas Pat. Umas.
Yeah, thank you. I have two questions. First, after this very sad and tragic event of Boris Nemtsov's killing, how you feel in Russian society? What's going to happen in this sense? Will it increase the level of fear? Will it be the outcome that actually pushes even more down opposition, NGOs, and so on? So that, well, if the answer is yes, then of course the political establishment actually gets what they really want. So that how to resist for the increase of sense of fear also after killing of Boris Nemtsov. And my second question is, it's also, I guess, very human. And the question is that we already got first indications about the investigation on a Malaysian aircraft catastrophe, MH17. And if the outcome of investigation will be quite clear who was behind, and that directly or indirectly Russia is behind, how it will, or will be there any impact also to Russian society? Thank you.
Thank you. Viktor Uspaskic.
Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to speak Lithuanian, so could you please put on the headphones?
Man teko savo laiku susitikti.
I had an opportunity to meet Mr. Kasyanov when he was the Prime Minister of the country. I was part of a delegation. I was in the delegation that accompanied our President, Mr. Adamkus, to Russia. And I had an opportunity to meet personally Mr. Nemtsov. And I have a very simple question. Why the people of Russia trust Mr. Putin? Why so many of them trust Mr. Putin? What should be done so that the people of Russia know the truth? I know that business is suffering in the country, that people are losing their savings, and anyhow, the trust for Mr. Putin is big. So what could be done about that? I'm really delighted to see your courage, and I will probably address you regarding several issues related to the European Union, issues related to violations of human rights. Thank you very much.
Martin?
Oh, well, my question was on sanctions, so it's already posed. I'm fine. I'm curious on your reflections on that issue. Thanks.
Javier Nart.
In primer lugar, I'd like to begin by expressing my condolences and the solidarity of the party which I represent, Ciudadanos, a party from Spain, because of the assassination of your vice president. You have to distinguish between your wishes and on one hand and reality on the other in the sphere of politics. We would all be in favor of as good a relation with Russia as possible. We've often said so. We want good relations with Russia, but not necessarily with Putin. The problem is that Putin is a reality that can't be got around today. We don't like it, but he is the reality, and there's a further aspect to this. We don't like this reality, but it, rightly or wrongly, enjoys a very broad form of support from the Russian people, and we may not like that either, but it's also a reality. What I'm concerned about is the possibility of continuous escalation, both by Putin's government and by the governments in the EU, in terms of reactions and counter-reactions. And it's fair to say that this is a result of action by Russia. But the fact is that this escalation is ongoing, and these reactions and counter-reactions are ongoing on the two sides to a very dangerous degree. And there are certain very vulnerable places which could be used by Putin's policy. I'm talking about in Estonia and in Latvia, the Russian-speaking minorities there. This is a shame, shameful for the European Union, but it's also a fact. And there's also the Transnistria matter, where one could talk about the Moldovan reality, but legality. But you have to talk about Transnistria, where the population has absolutely no desire to belong to Moldova or an area that's linked with Europe. We may not like that again, but I'm talking once again about reality, not what wishes, not wishful thinking. And I have listened with great concern to this increased drum roll, if you like, increased banging of drums, and you have to wonder whether people really believe or mean what they say. I'm thinking, for example, of the Polish Foreign Affairs Minister, who recently at a meeting with the British Foreign Affairs Minister referred to the possibility of accepting Russia's SWIFT code. If Russia's SWIFT code is accepted, says the speaker, the interpreter suspect he means rejected, that would be a casus belli, a case for war, because no country can now allow their SWIFT code, their international commercial links, to be broken off like that. It would be a bit like how in the Second World War the United States set up an oil blockade on Japan, and that led to war. So the SWIFT code with Russia is very important in that regard. Lastly, a concern. China is Russia's main strategic partner. There's a very vulnerable, fragile area in Siberia with a very low level of Russian population, a lot of Chinese population. The economy is very weak there in comparison with China. And Vladivostok's a perfect example, a port which used to be off limits, and it's now become somewhere where the Chinese have the upper hand economically. So my question, my concern is this. What could you suggest could be done with a view to defusing tension, as is absolutely necessary, not between Putin and Europe, but between Russia and Europe? Because if we don't relieve this tension, then we're on the danger of coming up against a tandem between China and Russia, which would be bad for you and bad for us.
Я хочу говорить по-румынски. Adică vreau să spun, vorbesc românește. Spun asta pentru că m-am născut în stalinism și eu sunt tot bătrân.
Well, thank you very much. I was born during Stalin's time. I have lived through most of this, and I know what the Soviet Union was, and I've felt this ever since I was a child. And it was always exactly the same case. I never really understood how the civilized world, how the West, over that period of time, kept sort of mixing Brezhnev up with Tolstoy. It was a sort of romanticized vision, and that was just made no sense at all. We, in the Czech Republic, in Hungary, we suffered Stalin's regime, and that in reality was something pretty different. And your opinion on the situation in Georgia after 2008 is entirely correct. We must remember those times and look at the effects this has had. This may never happen again, and I fear that again Europe is slipping into this romanticized vision. The world needs to be shaken awake, and that is what we need to use in terms of arguments. We see that the leaders of the civilized world have sat around the table and they tried to discuss and negotiate with Putin. They tried to look him in the eyes, and they hoped, just like Bush, that he was a reasonable man. But politically speaking, these people must understand that he is an officer of the secret services. He's a professional. He knows exactly what he wants, and he says what he wants. Even the president in my country did exactly the same. He behaved in exactly the same way. These people, through the use of propaganda, they know how to deal with democratic principles and to make these principles almost disappear. And that is what Putin is doing. That is why he appears to be an acceptable politician in his country, and that is why he is loved so much. What you do is extremely important. But I think that you're still very weak. This murder should really develop sufficient clout to wake up everyone, to shake everybody up as a shock, because the civilized world needs to understand what actually happened. I mean, an average actors have become presidents, you know. They manage to set everything right, and that, it seems to me, is the only way of approaching the future. Today in Europe, Russia, the major country, and Putin must not be mixed up. It's not the same. We need to say this very clearly. We need to say this out loud. Just like in Russia, the people and our friends know that we need to make efforts to promote European values, and that should really be the key of our relationship. There should always be a future between us and you. Thank you so much that you're moving in this direction.
Obrigado, Gui. Eu gostaria também de... Estou aqui. Eu gostaria também de expressar os...
Thank you. I'd also like to express my condolences after the assassination of your Vice President. I'm not sure if my question has been raised because I wasn't here from the beginning of the debate, but I'd like to ask, after Mr. Juncker's statement about the possible setting up of a European army, I don't want to ask what Putin's position is, because he hasn't got a position, because we know, as you know, he's insane, and the insane only have fear, they don't have positions. But what's the position of the Russian man in the street when he hears something like that? Because he must have been on Russian TV. When a Russian citizen hears that Europe is envisaging the creation of a European army. So what would the Russian people's reaction be? Would it be fear? Would it be disbelief? For example, if you could shed light on that, I'd be grateful. Thank you.
So last intervention, Kaya Kallas.
Yes, thank you. I also come from the Soviet times, and I remember very much the fear, because my father was also leading the Estonian re-independence fight. In a sense, we didn't have a fight, that was good, but I was a child, and I remember the fear all the time that does he have to do all these things because he will be put to jail? And I was really afraid. So what I wanted to say is that it takes so much courage to do what you do in Russia, and I understand that, and I just wanted to say that I wish you all strength to do what you do and not to give up. Thank you.
Michael.
All right.
Break it 12.
So let me combine in the blocks all those questions. Thank you very much for your interest to affairs in my country and affairs between the European Union and Russia, because just as we all understand that Russia is normal democratic country, at least by constitution. But we have problems. We have wrong government, which destroys all these expectations of Russian people who adopted the constitution by majority of votes. That's why just I'd like to start with those questions which you all, or some of you, asked about, just perception of Russian people, how they view the situation, and how we can deal with this. First, again, just you judging with all those figures which you have heard about popularity of Mr. Putin, let me have a few comments on that. First of all, just you understand that what environment we live, especially last year. And Ms. Kallas just mentioned that she remembers fears her family has, and she as a child at that time also had this fear. And now just what Mr. Putin and his team doing, they encouraging and just waking up those genius inside Russians. And majority of Russians lived in Soviet period of time. And they remember that period of time, they remember that fear. And that's why when sociological survey taking place, people immediately have a reaction. What to answer? Whether to identify yourselves as with opposition, opposed opinion, or just better not to create, not to attract any anger to you by the authority. That's why we should not take all those figures, even independent, we have one still independent trusted organization, Levada Center, but even their reports, of course, should be somehow adjusted for this attitude. And secondly, just that report of 85% of Putin's support was made just right after annexation of Crimea. That was not a support of Putin's regime in general, it was a support of annexation. Why Russians positioned themselves or thought that way? I'll tell you, I was shocked too, knowing those figures, not because just I don't trust the figures of survey, just I can deduct, say, 20% of that, it would be 60% of Russians was in support. But still, it's a shocking figure. Because I have my personal answer, because just all living generations in Russia now, they all believe that Crimea was always part of Russian Empire, Russian territory. They even don't think that Crimea was only 250 years inside Russia. And they know just this everything from the textbooks in schools and universities. But it is not a reason. We live in the 21st century. Whatever happened in the past, that doesn't give you a right to reconsider the borders in 21st century. I don't want just that Germany would demand, for instance, Königsberg back, or just Japan would demand half of Sakhalin Island and the whole Kuril Islands just back. I don't want just to have the whole reconsideration of everything. We live at 21st century. That's why all reasons about that absolutely not sustainable. We have an architecture of European security and we have respect that. Non-respect of this creating some kind of danger. And that danger we have now. Talking about Ukraine, as I said, there is no civil war in Ukraine. There was no reason to have it. And all reasons for annexation of Crimea was artificial. Mr. Putin provided that reasons. He said, we saved Russian-speaking population in Crimea from genocide coming from Kiev. Fascists from Kiev just wanted just to eliminate Russian-speaking population, and we saved that. That's absolute lie. None of single point of pressing Russian-speaking population in Ukraine was registered for 25 years. We had President Kuchma, we had President Kravchuk, we had President Yushchenko, we have President Yanukovych, who is Russian. He couldn't even speak normally Ukrainian. And he from Donbass. He never complained that there was a pressure on Russian-speaking population. That's absolutely a lie. And that's why even to think about just some kind of reasons which could describe aggression, absolutely unacceptable. Mr. Putin created this tension. He personally created this aggression. There was no reason to have a war. As soon as we have international control over the border with Russia, all these so-called separatists, but in fact 2,000 of bandits and Russian volunteers and militaries. As soon as the border is under control, in 2 weeks, 1 month maximum, the whole problem will disappear. People in Donbass now simply want to live in peace, but before wanted to live better. They see and can compare because they easily cross the border with Russia. Then same people, 10 kilometers from their village, but the same village in Russian territory lived twice better. They have better pensions and better salaries. Because of what? Because we had some reforms, and my government was responsible for that, but in Ukrainian governments never had any single reform. That's a problem. For 25 years, there was no economic reforms in Ukraine. And country is a very bad situation. You can imagine that they have redistribution of more than 50% of GDP through the government. What country in Europe can afford? Sweden a little bit less. Germany around 40%. Or Russia, we had 36% when I came to the power. I reduced it down to 29%. And we immediately just forgotten about all those problems and we put Russia on a trend of sustainable growth. But in Ukraine badly needs dramatic systemic transformation and then structural reforms. That's why people of Ukraine would like to live in better conditions. That's why there is natural desire to support those who promise them better life in every day. Now talking about just potential expansion of aggression. We should not shy to say about that. We had Georgian example. As an inappropriate reaction, we have now Ukraine. If inappropriate or softerized reaction would be here, Transnistria, that's next. Why we're talking about Russian-speaking people in Transnistria? They don't want, somebody say, they don't want to live in Moldova. But who gave them an opportunity to live in Moldova in a normal way? No one. They never tried to do this. Russian-speaking people normally lived in Ukraine together with Ukrainians, and nobody even thought about possibility of such a tension. Same in Moldova. And there is a commitment of Russian Federation to withdraw all troops from there and just to leave Moldova with Transnistria as a unified state. And we tried, even in my time, to implement that. After my departure, Putin has forgotten about that and turned it in a different manner. We were with delay. We have a special group there, negotiated, etc. Was some envoys just negotiating just on the final stage. And then everything was stopped. Then after Transnistria, of course, as I mentioned, Russian-speaking population and the Baltic states. It's much more serious undertaking because it's NATO involved. Now about defense, about just defending the territorial integrity of Ukraine. Every country has a right to defend its sovereignty. Ukraine has also such a right, even more, because the civilized world promised, guaranteed sovereignty and the territorial integrity of that country. And how we can let Ukraine betrayed it? How we can live with such a situation? And if aggression continues to take place, what can we do more? Not only sanctions. In this regard, I think just, of course, not sending troops. The people of Ukraine should defend themselves. But to put them on equal footing with this fight, I think that's possible. If Putin's regime applies sophisticated equipment, why Ukrainians cannot, as President Poroshenko said, with blankets, should fight against just army with sophisticated equipment? I think that should be serious consideration should be given to that. I'd like to believe that this fragile Minsk agreement would be implemented. At least the first part, which is very important, ceasefire. Second one, it's not quite correctly structured because just with the wrong logic, I guess. But of course, we should not press on Ukraine in terms of not being a member of NATO, or just we should not forget about just Crimea. And I would demand European Parliament, European Union would restate its vision of territorial integrity of Ukraine, on Crimea in particular, so that not to give an illusion that you're ready to such a trading. NATO, that's lie, that somebody promised to Soviet Union or to Russia not to enlarge NATO. That's lie created by Mr. Putin. And you should not feel a single feature of guilt on that. Russia is a democratic state by constitution, as I said. We are a member of OSCE and member of Council of Europe. We have the same values. When I was in the cabinet, I announced publicly I dream my country would be soon full-fledged member of NATO. And Mr. Putin, president of my country at that time, said he didn't exclude such a development. What happened since that time? What wrong European Union did during this period of time? Who changed the policy, the attitude to those values? Where trust disappeared? And that time we announced that Russia and European Union, we were and we are just strategic partners. And we launched so-called just fields of cooperation in economy and humanitarian and justice, etc. We announced we will building up visa-free zone. And as a main purpose was said, we built up free economic zone, just free trade zone, from Lisbon till Vladivostok. That was a strategic plan at that time. It was 2002, 2003. What wrong since that time European Union did? At that time we were sitting together, the full set of my cabinet together with the full set of commission, here they in Brussels, and discussing all the things. I cannot find anything what European Union did wrong. Even more, European Union developed an energy program with the increase of consumption of natural gas. And almost all this increase of consumption, 30% up to the year 2020, supposed to be covered by supplies, growing supplies from Russia. That was mutual dependence as a strategic partners, because trust existed. And we thought that trust, on that basis, we can build everything. Now that disappeared. Who is responsible for that? That's what the whole analysis should be given to that. How step by step this trust disappeared because of misdeeds of Putin. And again, it was correctly said here in the House that Russia and the regime is two different things. Of course, we continue to be strategic partners with Russian people, with Russian Federation. And that's why we should keep it in mind. That's why we should not destroy ability to cooperate closely and deeply. But we should not allow to foolish ourselves by this regime, saying just that European Union under the pressure of United States, they are not independent. They're doing what they got instructions, etc. That is absolutely no respect in all these sayings of Mr. Putin. And he, from time to time, he's doing this. Then on a reaction in Russia, what will be when there's information about catastrophe MH17 and the report of Dutch prosecutors. I think that it was not quite widely, even here in Europe, was distributed. And therefore, there is no information in Russia. I, of course, know, because those people who use internet every day, they know. And they had no doubt that it could be such an answer. Now just we have this confirmation. But it should be used by politicians, but strengthening the attitude. I'm not calling you just to start a Cold War, but to treat the regime appropriately. That's absolutely necessary thing. Do we need more sanctions now? I think not. No more economic sanctions at the moment, because now we have right sanctions, selected. That not sanctions against the country, sanctions against instruments which are in Putin's hands. State-controlled banks, state-controlled oil companies, which allow Mr. Putin to keep the situation like it is. Economy doesn't work already for 2 years. State finance is still in operation. And very soon, he will not be in a position to implement his promises to increase salaries to officers, to secret services, to pensioners and civil workers, public workers. But still, It is not, I would say, just simply the easy thing to achieve changes. Yes, it is strong regime at the moment, but it's authoritarian regime. He's doing usual thing which we could expect, as all examples in the history in the other countries. External enemy, mobilization effect, consolidation, then just pressing opposition, pressing human rights. What we shall do? To continue cooperate with Russian society, with the usual normal people, just for young people, to facilitate visa access so that young people can come here and would see, just compare life here and inside Russia, and to support human rights people. With these new laws, Putin's parliament and himself adopted with the foreign agents, so-called, when all human rights organizations were cut of finance. Of course, it's very difficult for them. Some of them are under big pressure. We are in opposition under big pressure, because just people are scared to identify themselves as opposition. What else we have still there? Structural reforms, you asked about structural reforms. If us in power, I promise you, within short period of time, we implement all those structural reforms we couldn't finalize. We made a lot, and that's what I feel a little bit, I wouldn't say guilt, but responsibility. That reforms my government pursued now just allows Mr. Putin to survive. Because everything goes in state finance, at least, in an automatic manner. He calling for hand operation, because just, you know, hand operation, that means just no rules. You're giving everyone we want and taking from everyone you want. That is how the regime operates at the moment. Structural reforms are absolutely necessary, and we need more and more, because just some of them were stopped. That's why I see just this regime cannot implement any single reform. Because why? Because any reform, it means risks. That reform could be not successful, and people will change attitude to you. But that's usual politicians taking this risk, believing to these reforms and taking this risk. But this regime cannot, because just risk is not impossible to take the risk. They're working for eliminating any risks. That's why we cannot expect any reform this regime could undertake. Therefore, in terms of both economic and even more important political sphere, I don't think just European Union could come back on a normal strategic cooperation with Russia with this regime. But we continue to believe that we are strategic partners, and we definitely come back to normal business as soon as we adjust the situation inside Russia. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mikhail. I think it was a very useful debate we got to have also an insight from what is happening in Russia, also with the democratic forces. We are supporting that, and our intention is very clear. That is, first of all, to continue to help PARNAS as a member party of the Alliance for Liberals and Democrats for Europe. I think that's absolutely necessary. And secondly, to make clearly also and I think we achieved it already, Hans, in the project of the resolution that we shall discuss tomorrow in the group, the clear distinction between condemning the regime of Putin and their acts at one hand, and at the other hand, supporting a strategic partnership and positive measures for the Russian population and the Russian citizens. And that is also the strategy we discussed this morning, a strategy on which we fully have to continue in the coming weeks and the coming months. So thank you very much. Wish you all the success that is necessary for the democratic forces in Russia, and I see you back in Moscow, I think. If we can enter in the country.
Thank you very much, and I invite you all to Russia, and thank you for your consistent support. Thank you so much.